The Kingdom of Asturias, established in 718 AD by the nobleman Pelayo in the rugged northern regions of the Iberian Peninsula, recognized as the first Christian polity to emerge following the Umayyad conquest of Visigothic Spain. Originating from the resistance led by Pelayo at the Battle of Covadonga, the kingdom served as a pivotal center for the Christian reconquest. Under successive monarchs such as Alfonso I and Pelayo's successors, Asturias gradually expanded its influence. The kingdom's strategic location in the Cantabrian Mountains provided formidable defense against Muslim incursions, fostering a resilient and enduring legacy. Additionally, Asturias became a cultural and political nucleus, fostering the development of the early medieval Spanish identity and governance structures. But by the late 9th century, the kingdom had evolved into the more expansive Kingdom of Leon, continuing its foundational role in the long-term efforts to unify the Iberian Peninsula under Christian rule. Thus, the legacy of Asturias is important to understand the formation of medieval Spain and the broader narrative of Christian resistance and resurgence in medieval Europe. And that's what we talk about today. Welcome to the channel, everyone. Today we're talking about the Kingdom of Asturias. One of those things that kind of gets ignored, but once you've read about it and researched it all, you realize, oh, that's why Spain is the way it is. So if you want to understand Spanish history, you really can't go past it. And so today we're going to be talking about the general history, some timelines, then we're going to be looking into some of the Christian movements that came out of it, the different eccentricities that were developed in the Kingdom of Asturias, remembering, of course, it's a very, very long way from Rome, and that lets creativity go a little bit wild. So, let us begin. Nice and relaxed. So the Kingdom of Asturias originated in the western and central Cantabrian Mountains, but particularly in the Picos de Europa and central Asturias. These two areas were the backdrop for a significant military and political development during the kingdom's formative years, never really a dull moment. In fact, even before then, historical accounts from Greco-Roman biographers and geographers such as Strabo and Cassius Dio revealed that several Celtic-descended peoples inhabited Asturias at the beginning of the Christian era. Now, that includes the Paesici, who had settled along the western Asturian coast between the Navia River and modern-day Gijón, the Astures in a more narrow sense, occupying inner Asturias between Pilonia and Cangas del Narcea, the Saelini, whose settlement was centered in the Sella Valley of the Astures, the Lugones, living between Sella and Nalon rivers with their capital at Lucas Asturum, the Orgenomesci, located along the eastern coast of Asturias, and then we have the Vadinienses, who originally resided in Picos de Europa region of Cantabria, but gradually migrated southward. Now those are the 6 main ethnic groups that had made up the area, at least according to these classical geographers. But of course, they differed on the exact territories and borders of these groups. Ptolemy had described the Astures as occupying the land between the Navia and Sela rivers, marking the latter as a border with Cantabrian territory. But Julius Honorius's Cosmographia placed the Astures' eastern boundary closer to the sources of the Ebro River. Well, despite such disputes, the clan-based divisions of pre-Roman societies in the Cantabrian Mountains diminished under Roman influence, as a more uniform political and administrative system became just the norm. And so by the time we get to the late Roman Empire and moving into the early Middle Ages, we see this more distinct Asturian identity gradually begin to develop. Long-standing conflicts among Visigothic and Suebi elites likely played a role in unifying the Cantabrian population. Archaeological evidence from the Castro of La Carissa in the municipality of Lena reveals a defensive line constructed between 675 and 725 AD. Now, what does this all mean? Well, the fortification aimed to protect central Asturian valleys from incursions through the Pajare Pass, with carbon 14 dating, linking it to two campaigns. The first was by the Visigothic king Wamba from 762 to 780, and another by the Muslim governor Musa bin Nusayr during the Umayyad conquest. Asturian identity solidified following Pelagius's coronation and the defeat of Muslim garrisons at Covadonga in the early 8th century. The Chronica Albidense emphasizes the significance of these events, stating, "Divine providence brings forth the King of Asturias." Of course, it is here where we typically mark the traditional establishment of the Kingdom of Asturias, at the victory of Covadonga. And now on to Pelayo. In Latin, we say Pelagius, but of course, Spanish rendering will continue to use Pelayo. He was a nobleman who may have been Asturian, and he's typically seen as the person who had founded the kingdom. Before the Battle of Covadonga, there could not have been a significant refugee movement from central Iberia, and Musa bin Nusayr conquered Asturias in 714 with no known, or at least any effective, resistance to him. But after the Battle of Guadalete, where he was chosen by the other nobles to lead the Astures in the Gothic tradition of Theas, he is said to have retired to the Asturian mountains, while at first Pelayo's kingdom served as a unifying symbol for the already existing guerrilla resistance groups. Well, the Muslims, of course, were not going to take it lying down. It was always a fight, especially on those frontiers of the Islamic world, Spain, Iberia, certainly being one of them. Muslim forces took control of the major cities and administrative hubs during the Islamic conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. The newcomers used the pre-existing Visigothic administrative structures, which in the most part were ultimately of Roman origin, and they had very little trouble controlling the central and southern regions, including the Ebro valleys and Guadalquivir. Urban centers like Gijon, however, were essentially non-existent in the northern mountains, and the country's submission had to be accomplished piece by piece, valley by valley, in order to guarantee the pacification of the recently conquered territory. Muslim troops frequently turned to the taking of hostages. Nothing unusual, just the way it was. The Yemeni viceroy of Ifriqiya, Musa bin Nasir, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar the following year and launched a massive conquest operation that resulted in taking capture of Merida, Toledo, Zaragoza, and Lerida among other cities, following Tariq's initial incursion, which reached Toledo in the year 711. He advanced to the northwest of the peninsula in the final stages of his military campaign, seizing the towns of Astorga and Gijon. He assigned a governor named Munuza to a small Berber detachment in the latter city with the goal of strengthening Muslim rule over Asturias. Some nobles had to turn over hostages from Asturias to Cordoba as a condition of the region's submission. And according to legend, not confirmed, but there was an alliance with the local Berber leader that was sought, and his sister was requested. Later, when he rebelled against his Cordoban Arab superiors at another mountain post in the Pyrenees, Munuza would attempt to do the same to bring a diplomatic situation to a close. Only a generation before, the Berbers had converted to Islam and were viewed as, well, inferior to Arabs and Syrians. Think of it like the converso situation with Jews converting. Yes, it was easy enough to just click your fingers and say you were a Catholic, but there was still a lot of animosity. There were also racial elements to it with the Berbers. But that's a conversation for another time. The most widely accepted explanation for the battle, which was a mere skirmish in Muslim texts, but quite epic in later Christian and Asturian sources, is that the Moorish column was attacked from the cliffs, and then it fell back through the valleys towards what is now Gijon. However, the retinue attacked it in retreat and almost destroyed it. The incident is actually not mentioned in the Christian Chronicle of 754, the only near-contemporary account of the events of the time. But, according to the Rotensian Chronicle and Ahmed Mohammed al-Makari, Pelayo fled Cordoba when al-Hur was governor. That was around 717 to 18, and his return to Asturias led an uprising against the Muslim rulers of Gijon. That is just one theory, though, and Pelayo's identity is still somewhat up for debate. And so, under Al-Kama, Munuza dispatched troops to Bres, in the district of Pelayo, where the Asturias leader lived at the time. Upon learning of the Muslims' arrival, Pelayo and his friends quickly crossed the Pelayo and made their way up to the small, easily fortified valley of Mount Oseva, where they sought safety in one of the caves, Covadonga. The troops reportedly leapt through the high ports to the south to continue their search and destroy operation against other rebels, after an attempted siege was called off due to weather and the exposed location of the Deep Valley Gorge. Well, the Muslims almost had them there, but the locals managed to organize an ambush. The Asturian maritime districts, however, were left vulnerable, as the few survivors headed south to the Leon Plains. Pelayo gained a great deal of prestige from the victory, which was relatively small because only a small number of Berber soldiers were involved. But it also sparked a massive uprising by other nobles, leading by example in Asturias and Galicia, who immediately united behind him and elected him the king. Attacks on the Berbers escalated under Pelayo's command. Feeling alone in a hostile environment, Munuza made the decision to leave Gijon and travel the Mesa Trail to the plateau. But he didn't get too far. At Olales, in the present-day district of Grado, the Astures intercepted and killed him. After driving out the Moors of Asturias' eastern valleys, Pelayo fortified the mountain passes to keep the area safe from Moorish assaults and launched an attack on Leon, the principal city in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. In reaction to the broader uprising against Arab rule in Cordoba, the Berbers largely abandoned their garrisons. But Pelayo persisted in attacking those who stayed north of the Asturian mountains until they fled. After that, he wed his daughter Ermesinda to Alfonso, the son of Peter of Cantabria, the head of the state of the Visigothic Duchy of Cantabria, which at that time was still independent. Fortifications dating from the end of the 7th to the start of the 8th centuries have been discovered during recent archaeological excavations in Mount Homon and La Carissa, which are close to Huerna and the Pajares valleys. Hundreds might have contributed to the construction and defense of nearly 2-meter deep moats and watchtowers that were part of the Berber fortifications. That would have needed a great deal of planning, of course, and strong leadership, most likely from Pelayo himself. As a result, experts believe likely that this defensive line was built to keep the Moors from re-entering Asturias through the Mesa and Pajares mountain passes. And so that's the origin story of the Kingdom of Asturias, beginning as this small, autonomous territory following Pelayo's victory at the Battle of Covadonga, even though it was a relatively small Moorish detachment. But hey, it's still a victory. The Visigothic king's leadership, unfortunately, was superior at that time to Pelayo's, although the latter title was not firmly established until the time of King Alfonso II. The first Asturian kings actually called themselves princeps in the old Roman fashions, and then, of course, rex, meaning king in Latin. For example, princeps cantabrorum over the gravestone of the municipality of Cisterna in Leon. And there was another inscription found with the Principe de los Albiones in the district of Coaña. There are examples of this term of princeps for the indigenous peoples of northern Spain, of course wanting to emulate the very successful Romans. Well, the kingdom was actually founded as a center of leadership over other Cantabrian coast peoples who had opposed both the Romans in earlier times and then the Visigoths in later times, who had refused to submit to the rulers of the Umayyads in even more recent times. Of course, the indigenous people of Spain, very different to the Visigoths who came in after their conquests were all said and done. Alfonso II, however, was not keen on said Visigoths. In his will that he wrote at the start of the 9th century, he accused them of being responsible for the entire loss of Hispania. Well, perhaps they made some poor decisions, but that's a little bit harsh, I think. The Asturian dominance over the various regions of the kingdom was very weak in these early decades, so it needed to be constantly reinforced. Not too often through conflict, but more through marriage pacts with other influential families from the Iberian Peninsula's north. And thus, Alfonso, as we've mentioned, married Ermesinda, the daughter of Pelayo. Alfonso's daughter Adosinda wed Silo, a local chief from the region of Flavionavia, Pravia, while his son Fruela wed Munia, a Basque princess from Alava. Fabila, Pelayo's son, was crowned king following Pelayo's death in 737. In one of the bravery tests typically expected of the nobility of that time, kind of like a coming-of-age ceremony, Fafila was, or Favila, if we can render this in both ways, was actually killed by a bear while hunting, according to the chronicles. Though the case is suspiciously similar to the Roman legend of their first king, Romulus, being taken by a sudden storm, no other incident is such known from the long history of monarchs and others at this point, but it seems that perhaps they might have cancelled that coming-of-age ceremony after this disaster. Well, as a direct result of his marriage alliance with Fafila's sister, his brother-in-law, who ruled the nearby independent domain, inherited the Asturian throne. Inheritance rights and female ties were still upheld, and later on they would grant their husbands the regency or crown as well. Alfonso I, who married Pelayo's daughter, succeeded Favila and inherited the Asturian throne. According to the Albidensian Chronicle, Alfonso came to the kingdom to wed her sometime after Covadonga. His accession to the throne and the ascent of the House of Cantabria, one of the most influential families in Asturias, were made possible only by Favila's passing. Only Alfonso, initially, relocated to the court of Cangas de Onís, but the descendants of Duke Peter withdrew from Rioja afterwards towards the Cantabrian region and eventually took control of the Kingdom of Asturias after the plateau and the middle valley of the Ebro, which housed the Duchy of Cantabria's principal strongholds, gradually became depopulated. We're talking principal strongholds such as Amaya, Tricio, and indeed the city of Cantabria itself. It's quite a large population center. Alfonso started the small Christian kingdom's territorial expansion from its original location in the Picos de Europa. He moved it westward to Galicia and southward with constant incursions in the Douro Valley, capturing cities and towns and relocating their residents to the safer northern regions. But in the end, it resulted in the plateau's strategic depopulation, forming the desert of the Duero as a defense against the upcoming Moorish assaults. The Astures' pre-Roman raids in the same region were likely not all that dissimilar from the campaigns of King Fruela and King Alfonso in the Duero Valley. The Kingdom of Asturias was able to effectively occupy the land south of the Cantabrian Mountains until the reigns of Ordoño and Alfonso III. The first Asturian expansion was primarily conducted through Cantabrian territory, from Galicia to Biscaya. Alfonso's son, Fruela I, enlarged and united his father's territories. Members of the House of Cantabria's nobility were responsible for his murder in the end. Politics, infighting, always. Now, regarding the reigns of Aurelio, Silo, Maurogatus, and Bermudo I, we don't have too many written sources, and the ones we do have are quite brief. This 23-year period between 768 and 91 has generally been regarded as the Kingdom of Asturias' protracted period of decline and obscurity. Now, some historians support this, even referring to this historical period as the lazy king's time, because it seems that no significant military operations against al-Andalus and the Moors took place during that time. Nonetheless, there were significant and pertinent internal changes that laid groundwork for Asturias' development and growth. First, during those years, Maurogato, 783 to 88, led the first internal uprising. Alfonso II was overthrown by this, but he later ascended to the throne once more from 791 all the way to 842. Now, this sparked a string of subsequent uprisings, the main leaders of which were landowners and members of the rising aristocratic palace groups who attempted to overthrow the Don Pelayo ruling family based on the region's expanding economic development. The Asturian kingdom underwent a process of economic, social, political, and cultural change in the 8th and 9th centuries, which included the significant uprisings of Nepociano, Aldroito, Pineolo during the reign of Ramiro I. It was 842 to 850. Things getting a little bit difficult after Alfonso II. Now, secondly, Asturian kings put an end to the nearby Basque and Gallic insurrections by giving refuge to Alfonso II in Alava after his flight, supporting Nepociano's rebellion in some Asturian regions, and encountering Galicians to support Ramiro I. These rebels exploited the turmoil in central and eastern Asturias and occasionally offered assistance to one or more heirs. Lastly, additional evidence points to the significant internal changes that took place during this period. According to the chronicles, there were uprisings by freedmen known as Serbi, Serviles, Orico, and Libertini during the reign of Aurelio I. The master-slave property relationship gradually deteriorated. Another sign that a new society was developing in Asturias at the end of the 8th century and the start of the 9th is this fact. Along with the expanding role of the individual and the limited family, to the detriment of the extended family. Aurelius, reigning from 768 to 74, the grandson of Fruela of Cantabria and Peter of Cantabria, succeeded Fruela I after the death in 768. He would build the court in what was once Langreu's district, now San Martin del Rey Aurelio. After his death, he was succeeded by Silo, who moved the court to Pravia. Silo was wed to Adosinda, who was Pelayo's granddaughter and one of the daughters of Afonso I. After Silo's death, which occurred in 783, Alfonso II was elected king. But Marigato mounted a fierce resistance and drove the new ruler to retreat to Alavia, gaining the Asturian throne. Despite the negative image that history has given him, the king had a cordial relationship with Vitus of Liabana, who was arguably the most significant cultural figure in the kingdom. The king also helped Vitus fight against adoptionism. We'll get to that a little bit later. According to legend, Marigato was the honor of 100 maidens and the bastard son of Alfonso I and a Moorish woman. Aurelius' brother, Bermudo I, succeeded him. He was referred to as the deacon, even though he most likely only received token vows. Following a military defeat, Bermudo abdicated and died in a monastery. So really the kingdom was not firmly established until King Alfonso II, following Silo's conquest of Galicia and the confirmation of territorial gains in the western Basque country. Additionally, relations with the very powerful Carolingian Franks became closer and more frequent, with Charlemagne receiving war booty from Alfonso II's envoys around the campaign of Lisbon, 797. Being referred to as an Emperor Charlemagne's man by Alfonso II implied suzerainty of some sort. Alfonso II's establishment of the order and ceremonies of the former Visigothic kingdom in the Asturian court during his reign was likely a reaction against indigenous customs, intended to solidify his state and hold on to power. At this time it was announced that the holy bones of James, son of Zebedee, had been discovered at Iria Flavia in Galicia. The Pope of Rome was reportedly quite impressed, and at the time regarded them as genuine. But during the Asturian era, the main religious location and object of devotion was Eulalia of Meritia's final resting place in Oviedo. In addition, Alfonso II established control over some Basques and repopulated areas of Galicia, Leon, and Castile, incorporating them into the larger Kingdom of Asturias. Cangas de Onís, close to the scene of the Covadonga battle, served as the first capital city. It was then relocated to Pravia during the reign of Silo. Around 789, Alfonso decided to make Oviedo, where he was born, the capital of the kingdom. There's nothing like your hometown, right? Now, at the start of his reign, Ramiro I imprisoned a number of other heirs to the throne. And that wasn't enough, he also blinded them. They didn't see that coming, and placed them in monasteries. Which I don't know why he did that, because it's not like they'd be doing much Bible reading. Probably didn't think that through. Well, as a warrior, Ramiro I fought multiple battles against the Moors and defeated a Viking invasion after the Vikings had landed at Corunna. And then we have Ordoño I, 850 to 866, who succeeded his father Ramiro, put down a significant Basque uprising in the kingdom's east. Musa ibn Musa of the Banu Qazi, who had rebelled against Cordoba and risen to become the ruler of Zaragoza, Huesca, Toledo, and Tudela, constructed the fortress of Albelda, which Ordoño besieged in 859. With the help of his brother-in-law, Garcia Iniguez, the king of Pamplona, whose realm was in danger due to the Asturian monarchy's expansion, Musa tried to break the siege. But during the ensuing conflict, Musa lost important treasures, some of which were sent to Charles the Bold of France as gifts, and was ultimately defeated. According to the chronicler, Albelda collapsed 7 days after the victory, and its warriors were killed by the sword, and the place itself was destroyed down to the foundations. The Asturian king accepted Musa's son Lub as governor of Toledo for the remainder of Ordoño's rule after Musa died in 862-63 from wounds sustained in battle. And thus the Kingdom of Asturias broke up into Leon, Galicia, and Asturias after Alfonso III was forced to abdicate by his sons in 910. Under Leon's rule, the three kingdoms were finally reunited in 924. After Ferdinand III became joint king of the two kingdoms, it remained by that name until 1230, when it was merged into the Kingdom of Castile. So maybe it's gone, but it's certainly not forgotten. Let's talk about what we have left from Asturias. There is that great religious tradition that developed in not so much of a vacuum, but so far away from Rome that it had some opportunity to become kind of unique without drawing too much ire. So in Asturias, Christianization developed gradually, and it didn't always replace the prehistoric pagan gods. Do remember, Spain is a very, very old place with indigenous customs, just like anywhere else in Europe. The new religion coexisted pretty syncretically with elements of the old beliefs, just like in parts of Gaul and other places of the empire. Many demons who were expelled from the heavens settled in the sea. In the rivers, fountains, and forests would become worshipped as gods by ignorant people, wrote the bishop San Martin de Braga in his work in the 6th century, in reference to the Galician peasants' attachment to their pre-Christian beliefs. They offer sacrifices to them by calling Neptune in the sea, he goes on to say, the Lamias in the rivers, the nymphs in the fountains, and Diana in the forests. Of course, this is what they're seeing through Roman eyes. They recognize it as nymphs in fountains and Neptune in the sea. But of course, the reality on the ground is a little bit different for those indigenous religious traditions. But yes, seeing them through the eyes of Roman biographers. Now, there was a megalithic dolmen area, so you're talking these big stone monuments in the center of the Sella Valley, where Consolidation is situated, probably constructed all the way back between 4000 and 2000 BC. A little hard to date, but it's kind of thereabouts. Here, especially in the Santa Cruz dolmen, chieftains from neighboring areas were ceremoniously interred. Despite the Roman and Visigothic conquests, these customs seemed to have persisted. King Favila and the remains of tribal chiefs were interred there as early as the 8th century. Even though the Asturian monarchy helped Christianize this location by building a church, the Santa Cruz dolmen are still associated with pagan customs even to our modern era. Visitors are reported to see Zanas or Asturian fairies, and the local soil is said to possess magical qualities, but, well, open minds, but citation certainly needed on that one. Now, a vate named Asterio presided over its consecration in 738, according to an inscription in a discovery in the Santa Cruz Church. Catholic epitaphs and documents, and the words vate or vates is rarely used. Instead, presbyteros for Christian priests is a little bit more common and preferable. Now, the ancient Greek authors Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Posidonius claim that the vates were one of the three classic of the Celtic priesthood, along with the Druids and the Bards. But in Latin terminology, the term vates was used to refer to a more clairvoyant kind of poet. Of course, through the modern filtration of using these words, especially with Druids and Bards and vates, well, it takes on a little bit of a different meaning. Now back to Asterio. He may have been associated with the Brythonic refugees that arrived in Bretonia or Galicia in the 6th centuries, according to some historians, while others believe that he held a religious position that blended aspects of paganism and Christianity together. According to the Parochia Suevorum, an administrative document from the Kingdom of the Suebi, the Bretonian See owned the Asturian lands, and elements of the Celtic Christianity made their way to northern Spain. The Celtic tonsure, which the Visigothic bishops who took part in the Fourth Council of Toledo denounced, serves as proof of this. Like other medieval kings, like Penda of Mercia or Witikund, Asturian kings promoted Christianity while simultaneously basing their authority on indigenous religious traditions. They also drew on Christian sacred texts, particularly the Book of Revelations, Ezekiel and Daniel, as well as the writings of the Church Fathers. These provided the foundation myths for the new monarchy. Since the arrival of the new influences such exiles and prisoners from the central region of al-Andalus in the 770s, along with their mixed Berber, Arabic and Gothic heritage, the Visigothic Code has served as a referential document, negating the need for them to draft new laws. This was coupled with the religious and political concepts brought from the Frankish kingdom of Charlemagne. Gothic Arianism, which denied the divinity of Jesus, and Hellenistic religion, which featured heroes like Heracles, who achieved apotheosis after death, served as the foundation for the adoptionist theology. Now, Beatus was a direct participant in the adoptionism debate, and we have mentioned his name before, which maintained that Jesus was born only as a man, but only after his crucifixion and resurrection did he receive divine adoption. He disputed this theological stance, which was supported by individuals like the Toledo Bishop Elipanto. The development of adoptionism was also impacted by Islamic beliefs that actually did recognize Jesus as a prophet, but not the Son of God himself, since Elipandus's bishopric of Toledo was then a part of the Muslim Caliphate of Cordoba. However, Beatus from his abbey in Santa Toribio delle Liabana fiercely opposed this adoptionist theology. The Pope and his friend Alcuin of York, the Anglo-Saxon scholar who had settled among the Carolingian court at Aachen, helped Beatus in his theological struggle, while also fortifying ties between Asturias, the Holy See, and of course the Carolingian Empire. The Italian author Umberto Eco once remarked, "Their splendid images gave birth to the most relevant iconography happening in the history of mankind." Beatus's commentaries to the Apocalypse were his most transcendental works, and they were later copied into manuscripts. He gives them his own interpretation of the Book of Revelation, complete with intriguing illustrations, quotations from the Church Fathers, and even some throwbacks to the Old Testament. One of the best examples of mappa mundi of the high medieval culture is the Beatus map, which is included in the prologue to the second book of the commentaries. This map was intended to depict the apostles' diaspora during the early decades of Christianity, but not to provide a cartographic representation of the world. Beatus used information from the Bible, Ptolemy, and Isidore of Seville's writings, put it all together, and tried his best to piece the paths of the apostles. Asia was shown as the upper semicircle, Europe as the lower left quadrant, and Africa as the lower right quadrant of a land disk encircled by the ocean. The boundaries between the various continents were established as the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River, the Aegean Sea, and the Bosphorus. Beatus also thought that the Antichrist would rule for 1290 years after the Apocalypse, which was prophesied in the Book of Revelation, and he thought that this was just about to happen, right around the corner. He shared the opinions of Augustine of Hippo, whose book, The City of God, shaped the commentaries, which predicated on the idea that the world's history was organized into 6 different ages. The first 5 took place between Adam's creation and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, while the 6th, which came after Christ, concludes with the fulfillment of the prophecies found in the Book of Revelation. For Beatus, the events in Hispania, Islamic domination, adoptionist heresy, and the Mozarab's slow assimilation were all signs of the impending end of the world. The abbot of Santo Toribio even went as far to proclaim that his fellow countrymen, the arrival of the end of time on Easter of the year of 800, as Elipandus details in his letter from the bishops of Spain to their brothers in Gaul. I can only imagine how that would have been taken. Imagine the panic. Very irresponsible. Well, hundreds of peasants gathered around the abbey of Santa Toribio at the break of day, fearfully anticipating the prophecy's realization. One of them, Ordonius, cried out, "Let us eat and drink, so that if the end of the world comes, we are full," after they had been inside without food for a day and a half. The Chronica Prophetica, written circa 880s CE, foretold the eventual collapse of the Emirate of Cordoba and the conquest and redemption of the entire Iberian Peninsula by King Alfonso III. Beatus's prophetic and millennialist visions left a lasting impression on the evolution of the kingdom. The main symbol of the Asturian kingdom, the Victory Cross icon, which derives from a section of the Book of Revelation in which John of Patmos describes a vision of the Second Coming, is another example of millennialist imagery found within the kingdom. Since Constantine the Great used the labarum as a symbol during the Battle of Milvian Bridge, you know that it's kind of like a P with a cross down the bottom of it, you know the one. It was also true that this was not simply limited to Asturias, and you see it everywhere in Asturian iconography. However, the Cruz de la Victoria gained widespread usage in Asturias, where it is engraved in almost all pre-Romanesque churches. The construction of the Camino de Santiago, one of the most significant routes of cultural transmission in European history, is another of the Asturian kingdom's greatest spiritual legacies. The Breviarius de Hierosolima, a document from the 6th century that claimed that the apostle was buried in a mysterious location known as Aca Maramachia, is the first source that makes reference to St. James's preaching in Spain. Isidore of Seville provided evidence in favor of this theory. In the Maurigato era, 150 years later, St. James was portrayed as the golden head of Spain, a protector and national patron. His sermons in the early decades of Christianity in the Iberian Peninsula are also mentioned. But there is a debate as well whether Beatus is the true author of this hymn. I suppose we just don't know. Now, for the Kingdom of Asturias, the establishment of the purported St. James' tomb was a huge political triumph. Asturias could now claim the honor of possessing the body of one of Jesus' disciples, a privilege that is only shared by Asia, in, Ephesus in particular, where John the Apostle was buried, and of course Rome, where the bodies of St. Peter and Paul were interred. Along with Rome and Jerusalem, Santiago de Compostela became one of the 3 holy cities of Christianity by the early 12th century. Through the way of St. James, numerous Central European cultural influences, from the Gothic and Romanesque styles to the Occitan lyric poetry, made their way to Iberia in later centuries. But nonetheless, there are some mysterious aspects to the account of this discovery of the apostles' remains. The body might have belonged to a well-known local figure because the tomb was discovered in an area that had been used as a necropolis since the late Roman Empire. And the remains of Priscillian may actually be in Compostela's tomb. According to one historian, Roger Collins, the identification of the relics, at least nothing approaching a complete body, with St. James has to do with the translation of the remains discovered beneath a church altar from the 6th century in Merida, which lists several saints' names, including St. James. Several Galician locations, including Pico Sacro, Pedra de Barca, and San Andres de Teixido, were already popular destinations for pagan pilgrims in pre-Roman times, according to other academics like Constantino Cabal. According to pagan beliefs, these locations were gateways to the Celtic otherworld. The pilgrimage routes were gradually converted to Christianity following this discovery of St. James's tombs. Of course, amazing tales abound about the Covadonga region, including one that is said to have taken place in a shepherd village where Lakes Ainol and Ergina now stand. It is said that Mary, the mother of Jesus, went to that village while posing as a pilgrim and begged every home for food and shelter. Everybody treated her rudely, with the exception of a shepherd who took her in and generously shared everything he owned. The very next day, A flood of divine origin ravaged the village, covering everything except the Good Shepherd's cottage as retribution for their lack of hospitality. The enigmatic visitor began to cry in front of him, and when her tears hit the floor, they turned into flowers. Subsequently, the shepherd knew this pilgrim was indeed Mary herself. Well, I suppose that's just a local legend. But it's good fun, isn't it? And I hope you had fun looking into the Kingdom of Asturias. A lot of good little stories, interesting things. I like seeing those post-Roman kingdoms that are somewhat under the thumb of the Catholic Church, but just far away enough to have a little bit of freedom. They develop some pretty interesting ideas, interesting icons, artwork, and stick to their old culture a little bit. And we can't forget the old culture. Now, equally unforgettable is the top-tier patrons and supporters. Dark, Gary, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitimus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, Charlene, Christopher, and Lynn. Thank you all so much, and I will see you in the next exciting episode. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.